Alright, so it's at the center of Gowanda, which that's what would become South America, Africa, and the basement rocks of Florida and North America, okay? So this continued till about 300 million years ago. Gowanda and Laurentia, okay, collided and formed the Appalachian Mountains. All right, so that's geologically, that's how they shaped the mountains on that. That's sort of that compression structure, how we talked about stretching, faulting, compression of that. So that's how they did that, and that is why the Atlantic mountains are older than the Rocky Mountains, and they're not a igneous intrusion like the Rockies. They are more of a fold and fault structure. All right, so then about 200 million years ago, Gowanda and Laurentia became Pangaea, which is what most of us know is the main global landmass that was back then. So that's about 200 million years ago. Florida was north of the equator, like its current position, but it was surrounded entirely by land. It was in the middle of Pangaea, is what the geologic basement rocks suggest. And then there's evidence that it was surrounded by a desert that's one of the stratification layers across that global region that they can see where North America and South America fit around Africa pretty much. Pangaea broke up after 85 million years, and a note on that, that is actually pretty small scale in the geologic time, because if you notice, we went 650 million to 300, then 300 to 200, and now you're going from 100 million years down to only 85 million years. So it's short-lived, geologically speaking. This breakup resulted in the Florida Peninsula. It broke into the North American and South American plate, and as you can see, those structures, they fit more around the African horn that's right there. And I know all y'all understand what. All right. That being said, this was a significant time of tectonic plate reorganization across across Earth, as is. The North American plate separated from Africa, as stated. The South American plate separated from Africa. And then at this point in time, basement Florida rocks were isolated and left alone. So you had the North American plate, the African plate, the South American plate, and then Florida was doing its own thing. At this time as well, Asia, India, and those tectonic plates were doing their own geological morphation, but that's not in our topic. As you see, though, from Pangaea breaking up mentally, y'all can construct that. Limestone was deposited. At this time, you're getting a lot of runoff from the Appalachian Mountains going down into the Sewanee Channel, Georgia Channel. We'll touch on that here in a second. Where was it? Yeah, limestone was deposited, and a lot of this deposition we can talk about. Florida Peninsula that was doing its own thing has been underwater and out of water several times over this. Whenever it's under those warm seas that it was, you had a lot of crustaceal organisms, be it either bottom dwellers or the dwellers that lived in the floating ocean. As they die, all their organism bodies float to the bottom, and eventually they're going to pile up, stratify into the layers. They become a lot of the limestone and metamorphic rock that is Florida. For tens of millions of years, Florida was separated from North America by what I would say in the Sewanee Channel, which is also called the Georgia Seaway. And that is in the pictures that I sent out. I want to say it was the first one and the second one. Yes. So that first picture that I sent out, you have the Sewanee Channel right there. That's this one right here. The first one, that. All right, and then you can see the Bahamic platform, and we'll talk about those rocks here in a little bit as well. And then when I was talking about the amount of land exposure above and underwater as time went on with Florida either extruding or going underwater, you can see that in the second image of the platform. Now notice that to the east of Florida, when it was, quote, 2 times as big of a peninsula as it was, you can see to the east, it still isn't going to get that big. most of this was to the westward of the current day Florida. Sea level drop in the Ice Age. It was called the Laurentide ice sheet that composed of most of North America. At this time, you're also going to get that land bridge that they think formed from Russia to Alaska. That allowed people migration, animal migration, everything to come over, and henceforth go south from there. Sea level drop is making Florida visibly connected. At this point in time is the first time, if you had a satellite, that it would make Florida being visibly connected to North America, but with distinctly different foundation rocks. The Bahama A blocks is what it was called, or Bahamian A blocks. Excuse me. The Florida Peninsula rocks more in common with that of Northwest Africa than that of North America, being off the geostratification layers they have been able to isolate and study. See, Florida has been, like I said, fully submerged in a warm, shallow sea, and it was twice as wide as it currently is. I've already stated that. Then that leads us to this. Once it made that visible connection in that Shawnee Channel went away, that allowed animals to come down. And since the water level with that ice sheet, as the ice sheet increased, the water level dropped. That made it available for animals to live on what is now under up to 300 meters to 200 meters of water. So that allowed, and that was more westward of that. This being said, that is also another reason why Florida does not really have any evidence of dinosaurs coming in, because they had that Shawnee Channel that isolated it. So really all you would have had was prehistoric ocean dwellers. If they were able to come out of the water and get on land, that would have been it. But there was no like mammoths or the dinosaur long necks, T-Rexes, all that kind of stuff. All right. My apologies. Yeah, and like I said, about 2.5 million years ago, the water level was about 100 feet higher than it is today. So you go from super low to super concentrated on the land. Few of the islands extended as far south as Orlando, and I want to say that was picture. Yeah, so that third picture where you can see all the water in the small fragmented sections of islands on there. That is what I have to present the highlands and the lowlands, what would have been the least amount of, as I said. A few islands extended as far south as Orlando. There you go, there's the picture. The northern part of Tallahassee, or excuse me, the northern part of the state that was north of Tallahassee is where the soils are much like that of southern Georgia, red clay. A lot of that comes from the erosion and depositional processes that were coming off millions of years off the Appalachian Mountains. South of Tampa, the soils become sandy, and it's sandy all the way to the coast and beyond. Most of Florida, what we know now, especially Miami, is built mainly on sedimentary sand rock. Coastal waves eroded the red clay during this period when the sea levels were at their highest. It left a layer of marine sand as it retreated from the basement of the sedimentary rocks that dominate a lot of this area. During the last ice age, Florida had 3 times its present landmass, mainly by the peninsula extending westward. As I stated, that's where a lot of the animals and humanoid activity would have happened once that water was retreated well enough. They could come from South Georgia into Florida. When the ice caps retreated and the land, obviously the ocean level rose, and that is now creating to what is Florida has become to today. All right, so now this can lead us into some of the Florida geohazards. 3 main types I will talk about: sinkholes, flooding, and coastal erosion. Those are pretty much your massive dominated. Sinkholes are common in Florida's karst landscape. As an example, to your right, freshwater limestone. Usually the organic water will start to dissolve the limestone over millions of years. Will make caves, tunnels. I did a presentation on Wiki Waters. It's a sinkhole just north of Tampa. They opened up. It goes, I want to say, 200 meters deep. And they actually have mermaids that swim down in there. They're actually human beings. They're swimming in mermaid costumes. They pump them air underwater. So if anybody'd like to go see that, they breathe from air hoses underwater, so they never surface. Pretty cool. I'm blanking on the name. Dr. the car specialist. She's my advisor. Nagel, yes, she's the one that helped provide this information. Chemical, like I said, chemical weather and dissolution of limestone or dolomite over time is what has formed these sinkholes. The second one, flooding. Hurricanes are Florida's most obvious flood producers. Also, they do have increments of heavy rain just in one area, as we talked about in the bay that we just left, doing those things where they said there's been mass influx of fresh water. They help dilute the salinity of the bay. And that lends me to the second point. Heavy rainfall in Florida at any time can produce massive flooding. Coastal erosion. This brings me to one of my last points. The coastal erosion occurs naturally via the different processes, and then sand is continually removed and replaced at locations along the beach beach texture as per longshore currents. And that brings me to the question, why is our beach white? A lot of people want to know why you want that desirable white beach in Florida. A lot of that is because the beaches are made of calcium carbonate and limestone. A lot of that comes from these skeletons of the organisms that died millions of years ago and have built up the stratic layers of Florida. As it gets eroded, be it stegular, the typical current, and then the longshore currents, once that is broken up, is able to bring that westward, is normally how the flow goes. This makes us, brings us into the next geologic things of spits, the barrier islands, which we have talked about, lagoons, and bays. The normal progression of that can go, you can get a spit that eventually closes off a bay, and then it would become a lagoon. And then the sea level is another, or I guess the final point here. One of the massive things is sea level rises, the land is inevitable to be flooded as part of, as sea level rise, loss of land is inevitable as part of the natural structure of Florida in the future. So, and that is going to be one of the largest things, is the incoming sea level rise of Florida. And at this point in time, I'll open it up to any questions that you have on the information that I've presented to you. Or if you have any comments to add thereof, sir, I know you probably do.
No, it's coming.
But that was a very generalized, I tried to do, what is it, 300 million years, 650 million years, and 5-10 minutes.
Yeah, I'm not, it's not a question, it's just something to add. I always thought it was really cool, like the continental shelf of Florida on the inside of the Gulf, like looking at it on Google Maps or anything like that. If you look really anywhere in the United States, or like you can kind of look worldwide, and that is like one of the biggest continental shelves, you know, like 220 something miles out, or maybe farther than that. I know it's at least like 200 miles. I just always thought that was like pretty cool, pretty fascinating. West, going into the Gulf.
Yeah.
Even east, I think if I have my geography right, if I'm remembering correctly, there's what's called the Blake Plateau off the east coast, and actually some of the people on the ship that I was on, just about.
That's one of the second picture I sent out.
They had recently done some mapping cruises in the area, and they said it is like the most boring thing ever. It's literally just flat, shallow waters for miles and miles and miles. And like you said, if you look at the picture, you can kind of see a little bit of it's not the entire Blake Plateau, I don't think, but some of that.
And I've fished a good many times, like up to like 25 miles off of Florida, and still, like, even if you go out there catching red snapper and stuff like that, the water was never over like 25 to 35 foot deep. Like, it was, you get out there and you think it's going to be super deep because you can barely see any land, like when you get 12 miles out, you don't really see anything around you, and then it's not. It's just like the bottom is really, really close, considering that it's a giant body of water.
And that brings me back to the point, as stated, that with the Florida Peninsula, as you go westward toward the Atlantic, like you said, it's pretty shallow and all that, and then there's a real steep, harsh drop-off.
Yeah.
A lot of that is because as sea level lowered and rose, that's how you have that real nice shallow, but then there's a hard drop-off versus the Gulf, where it's pretty shallow and steep all the way around off that.
I mean, like, you look at pictures of what, I mean, I think you mentioned it, but just as recently as, you know, like 11,000 years ago or so, at the end of the Ice Age, Florida looked extremely different. There's some places in the world that like look pretty much the same for thousands and thousands of years, but Florida is one of those places that at least looks the boundaries of like the water look extremely different.
And that's what, going off that point, that's how I was saying when Pangea and all them broke apart, North American, South American plate did their own thing, Florida did its own thing as well. And then you had those sea level drops and rises. You got smaller, you got bigger, you got wider. And then eventually you had the slamming in of the tectonic plates that stuck it to the North American plate along with sea level drop of that Georgian Swanee channel. That once that dried up, and all those sediments were then able to start coming off the Appalachians and off that slow lip and then start filling it in as well off that. That's why I said north of Tallahassee you see a lot more familiar red clay soils versus Georgia, because that's where they all ran off of, because you got to go through Georgia to get to the Appalachians there.
Anyone else? Comments, thoughts, feelings? I discouraged the last one. All right, then got a few things I wanted to get into, and a good deal of it's going to be a distillation of what Matt's already presented here. Kind of the fine points, but absolutely right. The first picture that we saw was that he had presented that strait, the Swanee Straits, the separation channel between Florida proper and the continent. You got to remember, Florida was late. So if you get into geology, you know that India kind of slammed into Asia a lot much later. That's why we have the Himalayas. Well, kind of a similar idea with Florida, except it just kind of docked. We didn't really get many mountains in South Georgia, North Florida. It just didn't get the job done. So the end result here was, as long as that strait was there, as long as that channel was present, all of those silicates coming off of the edge of the weathering Appalachians were getting swept away constantly. When Florida joins in, starts to make that contact, the Panhandle, North Florida area was catching those silicates. So my question for the group here is, we were at the beach yesterday. It was awesome. And we were very much on silicate sands. Those were not carbonate sands. You go to other parts of Florida, you get into the Bahamas. I know in the Bahamas, possibly some beaches in Florida, maybe you get some carbonate sands, but why were the sands so white where we were yesterday? Why the change? Why did we get from the Mississippi River and the mud and the muck and the brown stuff to those gorgeous sugar sands? Those were natural. Those were real.
Is it more like the quartz content, or?
Yes. And they're all quartz. So those were silicates. Those were quartz sands we were on yesterday, and further west when we were at other locations we stopped in along the trail.
Is it just like the erosion that it goes through by the time that it gets here, that it's a lot more finer and white and kind of filtered out?
It does have to do with the erosion.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Like on the other side of the watershed boundary, like this is how water flows from high to low. So that all collectively to the city would want this like kind of coast.
It's very much directly tied to the watershed boundary.
So what was that you just said?
It's very tied to the watersheds and boundaries. And it has to do with erosion. You're close.
It's not related to Mississippi, Jordan, Arizona, those are all one watershed basically. That emptied out.
Yeah. Everything over into Mobile Bay or the
Florida.
Mississippi River, sure. But we've jumped. We're now east of there.
I know the white sands in Florida come from the layers. I thought it was the calcium carbonate layers from all those dead animals that have, or the coral reefs that used to form it and just broke down.
So you can get into some places that have carbonate sands and carbonate beaches. Where we were yesterday was silicates. Those were quartz.
That would have had to have come off the Appalachian Mountains to be quartz and whatnot, because most of Florida is not.
So, what we've got here, several good answers. We've changed the sediment source. So now we're coming out of those Appalachian Mountains. So you got the metamorphic rocks. Granted, there's some limestone up there too, but limestone is not going to provide you the silicates. Those aren't going to be the silicoxygen tetrahedron basis. They're not going to be the quartz. So what we get instead are the weathering of the granites and some of the metamorphic rocks. You're pulling that quartz content out. It's getting washed more or less on a straight line down from the tail end of the Appalachians down into the region. And as you put it earlier, a lot of the westward movement, the Gulf of Mexico, a lot of the material kind of gets carried on kind of clockwise motion. So what we're allowed to do is build up those pretty white quartz sands coming out of the Appalachians. That's why Florida has awesome beaches, and not so much when you go a little further west. I should say they have a different charm, I guess. Right. So that's part of it. But that attachment of Florida, that joining and the initialization of the silicates coming in, whereas the rest of Florida is a carbonate platform. All the way down to Miami into the Keys is carbonate.
That's right.
And I speak to the Bahamas, there may be some places in Florida where you can get some carbonate beaches. I don't know one way or the other on that. A lot of them have sands, a lot of them have sand material that's been pushed and drifted, a lot of silicates in and around, which is coming off various other sediment sources, the Appalachians, further north, the longshore drift is carrying things around. But that's the reason we saw those pretty sands yesterday. Which gets us to the idea of the vast majority of Florida and karst systems. We're actually going to hit a number of springs, so what I'm going to do is break it up by fair warning. This was my dissertation work, so whereas before I've had a little bit of information about things,
Go nerd out.
now I've got to really rein it in here. What I will offer is, building off of what Matt said earlier, it's very much a dissolution process. So you get karst terrains, very basic level here. You get acidic waters, they're going to dissolve away those limestones, carry away the ions, but they don't do so evenly. Sure, they hit the land surface, sure they can cause a little bit of surface lowering, it's true, but in general, they get funneled. And when they get funneled, in one location or another, they find a pathway. Sooner or later, they finally break through something that connects. That pathway channels water. The more water that goes through, the more it dissolves. The more it dissolves, the more water it can. It's a self-perpetuating feedback loop. Eventually, you get entire conduits and springs. So we're going to dig a lot deeper into karst terrain and movements and platforms and the way that groundwater, surface water interact as we go. But for now, I brought you here. This is, as you can see, a big wide area. It is spring fed. This is very altered. We've got walls, we've got concrete platforms. The basin here is, I will guarantee that it hadn't had some alteration on the bottom. Dig things out a little deeper. I don't know one way or the other on that one, but pretty characteristic. We'll see a spring, and we'll see a spring run. The water's got to go somewhere, so it's nice. We're going to see better.
On a like EV.
of bears here.
The Florida black bear
Yeah.
range. It's not big, but
People don't realize how many bears are in Florida. They're just not big because
Yeah.
they don't have to pack on weight like they do in those upper elevations. They don't really hibernate either down here. It's like a mock hibernation. It's more being just lethargic for like a month or two in December.
This distinct lack of caves anyways.
Yeah. Well, and I found out, I thought that bears were in caves or on the ground too, but I found out on the AT, black bears sleep in the top of trees. So,
Hibernation?
yes.
For months on end, they just stay in the top.
Well, they don't. They do it like it's a light hibernation. So they'll just stay up there, and then they'll move around a little bit. So they don't do a true hibernation, at least until you get to like the northern states.
Okay.
I'm gonna use the restroom real quick.
Yeah, I'm gonna do the same.
I don't know.